brief intro. I was born in Akron, Ohio, grew up in North Hill, Akron, which when I grew up, it was a tough neighborhood, and it has morphed into a dangerous neighborhood. Went to Akron U, went to North High School, Akron U, and then worked in Cleveland a couple of years for a publishing company called Fenton. They produced industrial publications for various industries, and then decided to go to grad school at Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana. And after that, I was off to the teaching leagues. So I taught at Miami University, and then spent almost 3 decades in central Iowa teaching at Iowa State University before I retired. And when I retired, I moved back. So that was gone. I was gone from this Northeast Ohio for almost 40 years, 38 years. And I moved back because my wife still had family here, and I had connections here. And so we retired here. We liked Ohio really well because I spent 3 decades in central Iowa. So in terms of thrill measurement, I was very low. Northeast Ohio was very high. It had the amenities. We loved the Cleveland Museum of Art. Cuyahoga National Park was a big draw. Cleveland Orchestra, a big draw. So there are a lot of reasons for us to retire here. We came back, and I ended up living just a couple miles where I grew up from in Cuyahoga Falls. Okay. I taught graphic design, then illustration, and illustration morphed into fine art, meaning that if you teach illustration, you use like watercolor, oils, and then eventually your chair person says, well, you can teach this class in drawing. You draw, and you just start teaching more and more fine art. So somewhere in the early 90s, that last century, I began teaching exclusively fine arts courses until I retired in 2015. And Iowa State had a very strong orientation towards practical sort of art. I was in the College of Design, and when we taught drawing and painting, it was so that people who weren't going to be fine artists necessarily could use it. Architects, interior designers, graphic designers, illustrators. We had a very big program in biological and pre-medical illustration. I shared that for 5 years. And they really wanted to draw things that they weren't going to go into abstract expressionism. So the drawing was really fundamental. There's an aside here. You might say, what is this name and what does that have to do with you? So I explained to you very briefly my own personal history. I was an only child. My mother was an only child, very streamlined nuclear family. So I'm nuclear. And that made things simple, but there's one thing. My mother was a German war bride. And that meant that her family lived in Germany. So while the lion's share of my growing up was in North Hill, the minor share was also growing up in Germany. We spent many months, it accumulated to then a number of years, and growing up in a small rural town in Bavaria, 2 sets of friends. And her father was a graphic designer and a fine artist. And that was the seed, that was the kernel. Okay, that was the connection. One of the things I learned that I witnessed as a child, children pick things up, they're sponges, is that while the family almost loathed him for the paltry money he made as an artist, the community adored him because he was an artist. And I didn't pick up the money thing too much, just the adoration that we would get locally, the good tables in the restaurant, that he would get the seat at the city council, that he was kind of a tiny celebrity in this Bavarian town because he was an artist. And for me, from North Hill, that was pretty impressive. He was planning. I went to Akron U as a general major. I didn't know what I was going to do. took a test. You could go to student services to take a test.
Yeah, it's,
Aptitude.
here it is.
Where you have, what professions do you have the most in common with, so you go study it. The first profession was the clergy, which was weird because I didn't go to church. The second thing was something in art, something in creative endeavor. So after the first year, I walked out to the art department, and parents being still, while my mother was German, my father was very blue collar, to do something practical, do something to make money in art, and that was in graphic design. And that actually was a compromise that I bent that by pushing illustration. Illustration gave you, in that time, because eons before digital art made it, you use the same tools as fine arts, Jen. So you took classes, you drew models, you painted, you mastered the mediums, the acrylic, charcoal, and all of that. But you were going to do imagery on demand. So I did that for a number of years. So that was the lead. Okay. This was my grandfather, Max Hertwig. As an academic, he was my meal ticket. That meant that I basically breathed life into his legacy. He was, I wouldn't say a minor historical figure, and I kind of made him a Midland historical figure through my lifetime of efforts. Wrote about him, went to conferences, collected his work, showed it, and got him into the annals of art history. And so, because I knew German, and because he was my grandfather, because I was an only child, I had all the archives, and I could go around and write grants and go to Germany, get into museums, and pull out more stuff and so forth. So, this is typically, it's a nice selection. Karen was so kind in my absence while I was globe-trotting. She put together this presentation. I haven't seen it. So far, it looks great. So she put this together. So this covers my grandfather, these three images right here. This is a poster he designed for Liqueur in 1908. They had a certain style, it was very pivotal in the development of advertising. And actually, this was kind of a self-portrait. He used himself. He would have looked like this in 1908. And that's where you're pouring out this liqueur. It said, it's good for you. It's an herb liqueur. You know, you just don't drink a liqueur. You have to, it has to be good for you. And so these are hands, and this mysterious soccer hand coming in. Suppose a female wants to get in and all that kind of, you know, so there's a second hand. But that was kind of the style, and he was one of the pioneers of that style. This was much later, like in the 40s. He was a maniac with studying nature, and so he did a whole series of plants for it that had medicinal purposes. This was one. Then this is kind of like a really fast overview. This is a cover of a book I did about him. That was a culmination of a lot of things. So I wrote this book, and it probably had an audience of 27 people in the whole world. And it's still available today, Barnes and Noble and Amazon. But it's a very, very small target. It's kind of like I had to get all that information off my chest after a lifetime of research without ever really considering who would want to read that. So you know, they're very esoteric group. There's a guy in Chicago, for instance, a couple of examples. He redesigned beer labels for Chicago brewery. He was inspired by the part of it. Some designer in San Francisco. So it has its influences, but they're very spotty. They're just a few. Yeah. So I wrote this thing and then retired very shortly thereafter. I don't know what the next slide is. This is so cool. Okay. I'm amazed by the spectrum of art that everybody does, because I have hard and fast rules that apply completely to just myself. And they apparently don't apply to anybody else. They never do, except when you're teaching and they don't know anything, they're kids, then you can give them hard and fast rules. But every rule has been broken. Every rule that I've ever laid down, someone has proved, now that's not the way to do it. I can do it this way. And you look at it and say, yeah, it's better. It's better. History, I can draw a great deal from Akron because I grew up here, mainly, partially. And I have a strong sentiment, and we return, when you get retirement age, somehow you thematically return to yesteryear. This was a piece done from a photo, and I will talk a little bit about photo from versus doing it from home. Taken 1960, my parents had like an 8-person New Year's party in their basement. And everybody in 1960 did the same thing. They went out, they spent several $100 to retrofit a basement that was just meant to store coal into a bar. They put a bar in the basement, and then they invited their best friends over for a party. And people in those days, the women got dressed up to the nines, the men wore their suits, and they sat in the basement and celebrated 1960, which had to have been the best damn year this country ever had, because there's nothing but positive prospects on the horizon, right? 50s were good, 60s, whoa. So they're down there. My parents are not part of this group. They must be where I was. But I know who these people are. These people would know who they are based on this painting, except they've all expired. They're gone. But that's where my dad cut out these styrofoam things. This is the bar he built over here. And I pulled some of those shapes out towards you just to compositionally jazz it up a little bit, because it's a black and white photo. And everybody drank Seagrams mixed with something. Then that was the thing. Everybody smoked. You know, and this was a co-worker and his wife, Italian co-worker. He's a manager at Co-op Enterprises, a grocery store. This was a friend of my mother's who's another German war bride, and her husband Chuck, who's an electrician. This was Doris, who was their best friend at Bluesy. She was a Bluesy. That man could have been any one of 20 men. And you can see those two are unconditionally, you know, they're just too tight. You know? So this was a kind of a sentimental piece I did, not too terribly long. These were done when I moved to Akron, and there's a certain arc to what I did, and maybe it'll appear here, but I don't know what's going to appear here. So this is impromptu. Yeah, I brought this piece since I didn't see it. Just before COVID, just before the big COVID lockdown, there were some suspicions that maybe we should keep our distance. We didn't know. And so I was recovering from back surgery a couple years ago, just when COVID started, and we would walk to downtown Falls, which has enjoyed a bit of a revival. It's no Medina Square, but it's doing that. And there were these 3 young people keeping one seat between them, sitting at the bar, staring into their laptops, and I'm sitting at a table, next table over, and I had to take this picture. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And so I ended up painting it. This is from a photo, but it had to go fast. They don't know I'm doing it. Eventually, this woman saw it and wanted to buy it. She works for the city, some sort of city management role. And I refused to sell it to her because I liked it. I'm one of the few people who has a hard time parting with her artwork, even though we're in group 10 together. It's like, oh no, I hope nobody wants to buy this. So this represents a little more of a technique that I have been using, you know, maybe 6-7 years, where I work from a photo, but not always. And then I draw it using pencil, and that's not cool because classically you draw it using a paintbrush. And then I underpaint it in acrylics using the complements of what I think are going to be on top in oil, because that's the logo color, that's what we see. So I'm kind of guessing a complementary palette, and then I finish it off with oils with those strokes that you see, although there's certain elements, you can see that this is a certain element of yellow, orange, and ochre coming through. That's the underpainting, but it's painted out. So there's a few inexplicable little color spots that come through. So this is fairly tight. And I recognized during the pandemic, my work was getting tighter and tighter because of the lack of human interaction. And so I quit last May. I just quit. I couldn't take it anymore because the trajectory was going this way. And started up again not too long ago, maybe a month or two ago. A couple months ago, I started again to paint because we were drawing figures again, which was, it's interesting. I've got a couple of those. If I draw figures or something on Fridays that I don't know what's going to be, then I can paint someday the rest of the week because I'm not just locked into this mindset. You talk a little bit to the people and you try some different things, but we didn't have that for the longest time at Akron Society of Artists because of the pandemic. And so everybody went off and did some art. Some people didn't do art, you know. I mean, we all responded to it differently. And when he came back, I looked at a lot of the art and I thought, wow, you're really going in the wrong direction. I must be too. we really need to get together more. So this is getting a little tighter, but it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. This is the first one I don't know what's going to be here. I'm used to talking in front of people, so that's the only thing I'm using to get through this presentation. I'm relying on that 35 years of teaching, being in front of people to get through this, because I have no more idea what's up there than you do. This is the industrial thing you pushed, okay.
Well, it's like teaching, you never know what's going to come up.
No.
You know, might as well.
No, you taught.
Yeah.
I was in college, remember? Okay, the industrial part, what happened is when I left Akron, Northeast Ohio was very heavily industrial. It was still producing stuff, tires and steel. The Cuyahoga River, you still couldn't drink it. It's terrible, but it was very, and when I came back, that was mainly a memory. I was living on kind of fumes because I really wanted to come back and do something industrial, but I kind of knew that that had gone, but I was hoping there'd be enough of it. I was really hoping there'd be enough of it because I'm just really attracted by things that are otherwise considered unattractive. So I had to go up to Cleveland and do the steel mill. That's still the Stein steel mill. I think they make new steel out of old steel still. And that is again, it's a fairly good sized painting, but where I went with my son, he does some photography. He's a pretty decent photographer. He's been doing that a long time, but he's mainly an airline pilot, but he's a good photographer. And so we charged past the gatehouse and took a lot of photos, and then we're chased away. And that's one of those things where big concern, you know, the expression is it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Well, that's one of those where we ran past the guard, we took some photos in that mud and stuff, and we came back. And then I put a couple of the most recognizable downtown buildings in there. They're actually over here, just to earmark it as Cleveland. It was, I was really like this scene, and that was done in the same style. I try to paint it, I draw it fastidiously, then in pencil, 4B pencil. 3B is already, I get the shakes. 5B, it's gonna be all over here. It's gotta be 4B. So for the last 20 years, just 4B. On canvas, which is really stupid because you take a 4B pencil and you go like this, it's time to sharpen it. But somehow that mismatch hasn't stopped me from keeping 4B pencil makers. So I draw in pencil and then I paint it, underpaint it in acrylics and a little more of the color from the underpainting comes through, and then I paint it with oils and try to bring this thing to life. It was actually more dreary than that. This is a detail of the Goodrich, what was left of the Goodrich plant. I was ghosting around there. My son was taking a coding class. Another son was taking a coding class down there, and I was looking for relics of the great industrial past. But this is a watercolor. It's a watercolor. The watercolor, I taught a lot of watercolor when I taught, but I don't use a lot of watercolor now because it doesn't smell as arty as oil. It's a really neat thing to be able to smell your activity. Okay, maybe it has something to do with push and pull of the brush, but taught way more watercolor than painting 1, 2, and 3. So occasionally I'll do a watercolor, just let it fly, and then come back in and maybe chisel out with water some of the lighter areas and paint back in the darks. There might be occasional little bit of drawing in there. I don't think there's drawing in this one. But this sort of thing is it would be my bread and butter if people bought them, but I won't sell them, so it's not my bread and butter. It's my interest, not bread and butter. It's just, yeah. All those years in Iowa, I also did some art, but not a lot of art, because I wasn't particularly motivated by my location. But I do have a strong, there's just so much to seize here, okay? And these are the things that just really are exciting to me. This was from the ASA studio window. While what I do is, my wife is allergic to oil paint. I don't have a studio per se. I have a little roost, a little room, and what I do is I stretch the canvases. I do all that stuff until I get to the oil paint at home. Then I take the painting downtown and finish it downtown. But we're moving out of there, and so I'm not sure what to do. Maybe I'll return to watercolor. I was working on this painting downtown, but over my shoulder, looking out the window, was this. And I kept looking over my shoulder thinking, that could be something. And so as soon as I finished that, I turned around, and I began this mainly by just looking through that window. And then COVID, then they banned us, like, you can't be in some art space anymore. So I took a picture when I was about halfway through and finished it at home, even though she's allergic to lights. Pardon? Yes, this is Market Street. This is East Market Street. Down there somewhere is Main Street. If you look back up the hill at the top would be Highland Square. The Art Museum, and that's St. Vincent's, that little tower sticking out. That's the old Art Museum.
Yes.
I love how things progress in Akron. We're making a big move. The new Art Museum. So those things, what I really like after the industrial parts are the themes in Akron that whatever you're painting, if it's man-made, had a greater purpose than it currently does as you're painting it. I love that layered sense of history. Everything was once greater than it is now over there in Akron. And so that kind of really captures my interest. This purpose, many of those buildings had a higher purpose, or were more appreciated in their day. They're still being used. Okay.
Imperial Forum.
Yeah, now that's right. It's the Roman Forum, exactly. Some of it. A temple, Saturn, I forget the part.
Twins.
What?
Twins.
Twins? Okay. Yeah, that's right. Apollo, no. Okay. I'll let that go, or I'll be doing this for the rest of the presentation. I painted like this here until this came along. Let me explain. So I painted representational art. I went to small towns in Iowa that weren't doing so well, painted some of them, and some major things. This is a frisbee golf course, you know. But and this is plein air. This is where I sit there in a little chair, and I finish the whole thing out there on site. And so I was painting like this. It's representational spaces in Iowa. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't have a feel for it. Iowa was a great place to raise my family. It was a good job, but it's depressing. It's at least central Iowa. Visually, it's corn. It's corporate corn farm. It's just flat. The glaciers leveled it, and it's just flat. It's got a high corn soy rating, but that doesn't help me. That's how. I actually own 65 acres of corn soy yielding property, built a house out there, trying to get into the spirit. Just didn't work. So I was here, and then I applied to be the chair of the department, and I failed to earn that. I came in second place. A woman who was in ceramics became the chair. They said, well, what do you have for the second place winner? They said, well, you can be the head of the graduate program. So for 5 years, I was the head of the graduate program in fine arts. Now, here's the point of departure. I was doing things like this, and the graduate students at that time, graduate students in fine art, were doing important, obtuse, oblique things that address the issues of the day. So I was A, inspired, B, cowed into taking a new direction with my art. So for about 3.5, 4 years, I did no representational art. I jumped into abstraction. And I jumped into abstraction the way I knew, which is I knew proportional systems. I'm not an abstract expressionist. We face a big canvas, channel your inner being and angst, put it out on a canvas. My graduate students, someone could do that. They do it well. I couldn't do it. So I had to construct these very tight things. And this top one, while it does have elements of the Roman Forum, is all based on proportional systems I was familiar with, which is the root 4 rectangle, which is 2 side-by-side squares, which is also a relationship to the Japanese tatami mat, which is roughly 3 by 6 feet. And it changes incrementally from Japanese prefecture to Japanese prefecture, but it always keeps the same 2 side-by-side squares. And it's subdivided, and there's arcs that you draw it, use a compass, and those arcs are part of drawing those 2 by 2 squares and those proportional divisions. That then is superimposed over a couple of elements from the Roman Forum, wonderfully identified, and add to that post-industrial quasi-apocalyptic color palette. Wow. And so I pursued this for a while. And then it also has a very textured thing. There's an artist, Anselm Kiefer, German artist, very textured, brutal surfaces. There's a little bit of that happening here. Cutting out paint, sticking it on, letting it dry. It's a whole different channeling of that sort of higher level art. Not surprisingly, for those years, those things did pretty well. I didn't make a name for myself. I mean, I had a name, but but I got into a few national shows with the abstract stuff. And I thought, wow, this is really easy. But you need a big space to make it, big flat tables. And it was hard. It drained. It's draining somehow, emotionally, intellectually. It's hard if you don't want to do it naturally. It's forcing us up. The bottom was actually 3 panels. Carol captured here, I think. Yeah. based on the golden rectangle. If you carve into it, it's comprised of 5 squares. If you put a circle in each square and start linking them, components of them, you start having these arcs. And the golden rectangle has a relationship to the mathematical Fibonacci series that each number is a combination of 2 numbers that precede it. So in effect, like this square and this square create the one side of this square, and 1 and 2 create 3, and 3 and 5 make 8. So all this stuff is going together in this mathematical thing, and it's a pretty big thing. I think it's 4 by 12 plus feet. It's a big old thing. That's a nice guy.
So actually this, I think these are the last images on the screen.
Okay,
So that we can, I mean, check it,
That's
see,
good,
but I
good.
think I ended it here.
the surprise is getting
How
exhausted.
big was the top?
The top one, 3.5 by 7.
So that piece, tell them about that piece, where it was shown in the exhibit.
Oh.
Yeah, where are they both now? Where are these pieces, both of them now?
This bottom piece is hanging temporarily in St. Paul's Church, West Akron. This is fruit tank gallery. Light in winter.
Wow.
I feel like we're taking a commercial.
I just can't.
And the county bought this piece, and it's going to be in Summit County Courthouse,
Oh, nice.
which really is surprising because I like it. But it was cumbersome. I basically always maneuvered it into our little basement, which does not have a 60s bar. And it was like a boat going up the Cuyahoga, where you had to kind of tilt it and go this way. And I wasn't looking forward to that. So the fact that they bought it was both. It's an honor and it was a relief because we were stepping over piles of snow. Okay, I actually unawares that Carol had put that together. How am I doing time-wise? Okay.
Yeah.
Couple more minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They don't kick us out till 9.
What? That's going to be a long question and answer period.
You don't have.
Okay, I had a few. I've penned these together under salient points. I thought I needed some salient points, meaning that, well, why am I going to show some stuff if I don't have some points about it? Okay, so I'm going to come back to one. The drawing. The drawing is really important. I drew a lot more than I painted. I probably still do. And that having the composition and the representation worked out before I lay on the paint, for me, is a great comfort, because then I can just worry about the strokes and the colors and all the components of painting. I don't have to worry about, is this line in the right place? So painters, I think, work in several ways. One is there's people who can take a white canvas, finish one area. Sometimes it's like a old sign painter just goes, or they just focus on what they think is a focal point. It's finished all up, and they just build up the rest of it, and it works. In school, the people who major in art, what they do is they draw with a paintbrush, one color, some sepia green, and they block it in. They block it in, and then they pull it out. They pull the image out of it. I mean, some photorealists like Richard Estes works that way. You know, you look at his work, you're like, oh, he must be. No, he just blocks in this big blocky thing, and he pulls out these super hyper realistic cityscapes. That's a classic way that people work. I don't work that way. I have to have it very tight, and then I begin to deconstruct it towards the end, which is backwards, but it seems to work just for me. So if the drawing is tight and a lot of the things and compositions and perspective and everything is resolved, then I can worry just about the paint. Okay. And so I know some people are very fine painters. They make good paintings, but they draw poorly. They have a good feel, good relationship between the brush and the canvas. They see in color and shape. They don't see in line. And that's cool. I can't do that. So that's one of the points. So under each of these is a fairly tight drawing, regardless of how tight or loose the work is. Here's a sidebar. It's irrelevant, but just kind of picture this. We had drawing as a base foundation course for this College of Design. Everybody who majored in anything had to take this drawing course. And there were 17 to 18 sections of 12 to 20 people in each section, and taught by about a dozen faculty. And we would meet weekly. And then there was a lecture component where 300 to 350 students would come into a giant hall, and the person who ran this, who wasn't me, would lecture to them, have a lavalier microphone, and do demos. You would do a demo, and they would draw as you drew. You drew on a tablet that projected on the screen, two giant screens, you draw. The fella who did this, his name is Chuck Richards, was also a children's book illustrator. And as he became more popular, he had big contracts in New York. He needed a substitute. So I became like his Shemp. Shemp was the stooge when the other ones kind of fell off the wagon. You know? So I, for a couple of semesters, had to do this class, 300 people, and you get ready for it, and you do a drawing demo. Now, what you did in the class was in the afternoon, the class was so big, there were neighborhoods in this class.
Wow.
The Chinese students, sometimes 40 strong, were over here. Lower right, Latino students. Mixture of people, and the more ambivalent ones were further back. You knew they were more ambivalent because their faces were aglow with what they were buying online. Craigslist. So you would have to talk about drawing, do drawing demos, talk about the history of drawing, the mechanics, perspective, all these things, and still make sure they're on task. You know, too long walkways, you walk up and you see people clicking out of what they were doing, and you walk out and back in. And when you did your drawing demos, I practiced all morning. So if you did a base and then you lit the base and you showed light and shadow, you'd be practicing, you know, maybe 3 or 4 critical ellipses based on the horizon line, and how to become more compressed and open. And to a point where you look like a wizard because you practice all morning. You walk in and say, oh, you know, you center it, the ellipses here, and they would see you and they'd be, you know, just starting like you would in the morning. But that had nothing to do with this, but I just want to explain the environment. That's where everybody had to learn to draw because they were going to use it professionally in somewhere along the line of doing architecture or product design or designing colors. Okay, plein air versus working from a photo. Until, just a few years ago, I just worked plein air. It wasn't art if you're going to use a photo. But I recognized I was getting myself in a bit of a corner. It's like every piece of art was a sunny day. And it was a pleasant environment. Every piece of art was a pleasant environment because if it wasn't pleasant, if somebody was chasing you away or shooting at you or something, you weren't gonna set up your tablet there. So you ended up with a portfolio of very pleasant things. So the outcome isn't necessarily different. For instance, to my eye, this is plein air. The waterfall here, very close where I grew up, the big falls is plein air. This one I'll talk about for a second. This is obviously plein air. It's a little piece. It's done very close to where we live. It's watercolor. You know, I go down, I draw with watercolor, come back to the watercolor, I take the watercolor home, and I pretty it up. This over here is plein air and probably shows more, you know, it's a little less finished. You can see the background color creeping through it all the corners. This is, we're sitting downtown Kent doing a mill, starting mill that no longer is in operation. This was final days, and everybody who got a coffee at the Black Squirrel Cafe came out and commented on it, which has its own unnerviness, but they were pleasant. They were pleasant people. So you could do kind of like an outdoor still life in that there's not much going on. You could do nature. Nature won't fail you. You know? Or water is, water is, you sit there long enough, it tends to repeat itself, and then you come to some sort of artistic amalgam stroke. There, jump up, right? Do that with your water. So that's cool. But when you do things that are more transient, or you don't have the opportunity to be there forever, like I can't go back to 1960 when I want, or something like this, watercolor window in Kent, where there's a lot of things happening. It's an early morning. You just shoot it. You could do it plein air, but you have to show up a lot of mornings at the same time. So then logistics, or not logistics, pragmatics. Logistics sounds like shipping something, isn't it? You can't use logistics anymore unless you're a major container corporation. So I've been shifting more to using photography because I wanted to change, to have more latitude in what I'm drawing or painting. That doesn't mean that I don't try to be honest. Every Friday, this is sort of a thing to do. We do life drawing, and you just do these on Fridays to keep you honest. Meaning, does your hand and your eye still? Are you still able to record figures in space? I like figures, people, a great deal because every Friday it's like I've never drawn a damn figure. Every Friday you're like, oh come on, you've done it so many years. How can this be so hard? But you go there and you get something, and maybe those are the good ones, yeah. Sometimes you just think, there's no way I taught anybody anything. But that now is critical. When I mentioned earlier about going too tight during the pandemic, drawing figures, being in the presence of other artists for me was important because it may sound odd, nothing helps with painting at home better than going off and doing something else, drawing a figure off location, and then saying, okay, now I'm not worried about the long-term effects of this. I'm trying to organize space in this figure. So that's become my substitute for plein air, just building a giant portfolio of figures and storing them under the bed. My wife isn't real happy with all these figures. She doesn't mind if it's just a hat, an older hat. But when it's a guy or a young woman, they're not clothed. She just never likes those. And they increase in number. They increase. There's just more and more of them showing up under the bed. Okay, this one. Akron is in a perpetual state of rebuilding. It is like the Don Quixote of cities. It's just never going to happen. So they figured that there's a major project at Main Street. So they're going to make Main Street vital and beautiful by killing off the few remaining businesses that are closing them to the public. So one day I was hearing somebody talk about this, and I thought, I should see the activity. So I went down and I started taking pictures. And this is from 3 pictures because I could never get enough people. I wanted to look more active. They're incredibly passive. There's usually guys with a helmet standing there. So I took 3 pictures, and sometimes they're the same person. This guy and this guy's the same person, but I made them look like more people. And there's a person coming out here and here. It's this guy. It's like a stop action. He's going around, and he's coming over to tell me to quit taking pictures. So So I got it to look a little busier and look a little more classic. And I keep tucking this guy in the hole here. And that activity was something, again, I couldn't get by just sitting there. They didn't even want me there taking pictures of them. So this is something that's begun to change what I can do. Some of these, like this one, why would you do this in watercolor? Just because it's a challenge. I like the fact there were 3 levels. That there's where you are, there's what's in there, and there's what's reflected from across the street. And that was just a pure challenge. So more recently, I've tried to go to things that are just have their own inherent challenge, but I haven't strayed that far from Akron. And occasionally I go on vacation. I went to dog sit in LA. My son has a dog, and they went on vacation at dog sit. So we walked every day. I was on the beach, and I can't hate the beach. It's so damn happy. One day it was dark, coastal fog, it's so gloomy. There's a little couple huddled with their cell phone. So I painted that. It's being framed right now. I like the fact that it just looks like not a day at the beach, but you're at the beach. And so when I think about painting things, I put way too much thought into that because many people can paint something beautiful from seemingly nothing. Many of you can do it. I cannot do that. It has to be something before I even start. And that's a tall order because it's like, no, that's not active enough. No, that's too active. No, that's not right. So, and sometimes they just pop up, like these people in the cafe. I didn't go down there to look for people at the cafe. I went down there to have a cortado. And when I saw these, then it's like, whoa. Actually, my wife saw it. She's more sweet. Saw this, and there's something there. There's something that's active. And so, same thing here. But here I did go down looking for that, and I think there's more stories in Akron, but they're not. They don't just present themselves. I really have to go out and look for them. That's about all I've got right now. I feel like I'm letting it out.
That's it?
Yeah.
There was something confusing. Oh, I'm sorry. We're gonna have questions?
Yeah.
Okay, there was something confusing to me about, first you're starting with the pencil, always a 4B,
Always.
and then you're doing a complementary color in watercolor underneath.
In acrylic.
Okay, acrylic underneath. Okay, that makes sense, of course.
Yeah.
It can be water with your.
Uh,
the other way around.
Yeah, that's right. You can drink wine after
Right.
beer, but not the other way around.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the complementary color is sort of showing through. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
like, could
yeah.
you give an example, like
This
orange and purple, or?
behind here.
Yeah.
like, you see the kind of magenta coming through the tree.
Yeah, how's that
You
happen?
see the orange kind of coming through the blue here,
Yeah,
like that. Then if you say the sky is blue,
right.
then it would be something in the red orange. And so, it's not just, it could be a triadic scheme, but mainly it's roughly complementary. So because, and this is the one that shows it best. So that is an acrylics underneath.
Okay,
Then the local color, the color that I'm seeing,
Right.
you're seeing, that's an oil over top.
but did you purposely let it show in this one?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah,
love it.
did.
I think it's great.
Thank you. I'm getting back to that.
Okay,
That's the thing about getting too tight. I was just obliterating the background. Still doing that, obliterating the background.
okay.
But now I'm getting back to that. Again, everybody here, it's kind of like you invented your own board game in your art. And when you're winning and you're losing. Sometimes, isn't it frustrating? You're losing the same damn game you invented. You invented this game, but you're losing games. Like, that's not how I pictured it. Well, that's what what I have on this is, to me, a painting should have a point at which the eye goes, an interest point, right? But then I want to let the viewer, part of my game, in on how that's constructed, revealing, like one of those magicians that reveals all the secrets that's hated by the other magicians, you know, like that. It's like, it's all lies. It's all, every stroke is a lie. It's like, you see a man back there? That's 3 strokes. You idiot. But that's what we're doing. And so I'm trying to do the same thing, but more obviously to say like, okay, this is a beach, but if you go over here, it's just some purple wash, you know, under the sand. So I think that's important, and that's kind of letting it, for me, it lets the painting breathe, it lets the viewer become more of an active participant. And also, I can't paint real time. I can't do it. I wish I could do it, but I can't do it. So getting just enough down is enough for me, and that's part of the game. That's part of my game. It's like, you lost, you obliterated the background, you know. But so, and then sometimes you think you're so clever. You think that looks great, and you take it to a critique, and people go like, I'm confused. What is that, a cow up there? It's like, look at a cow. Look at the shape. It's like, yeah, it kind of looks like a cow. I didn't want that. So the critiques, I use critiques a lot. The critiques that we have at ASA, if I'm working on something, people tend to outproduce me 5-year-old. But when I do have something, I take it to critique for you know, the reason that the input's really important. And to me, if you show something, if you show a painting to 3 or 4 other people who are artists, and they all hit the same button, they say, well, that's a great painting. Thank you. Thank you. I like to be complimented. Oh, just that lower left corner, I don't get that. Oh, you take it to another person and say, Lord, well, at the lower left, darn it. Then you know something's unresolved. You've got to come back. You've got to address that. And that's what I get out of critiques. That and the notion that you can't deal it out for 40 years and not take it. Seriously. You know, you can't devastate aspiring students for all those years and then be a big crybaby if someone sees something wrong in your painting. It's like, so, you know, that's been something I really enjoyed. The critiques help shape the work. Some of them, like that, I responded to critiques and make changes, and then they got into some shows. That's happy. It shows us the validation. That's why I do artwork. I crave validation, but only on the local level. I don't pay too much. But yeah, you know, I like it. And the last thing I want to say is that I work very deliberately and slowly because I don't want to make too much art, because there's already too much art. And we can't stop ourselves. You're like art junkies. And even though I claim I don't want to make too much art, I get kind of fidgety and a little moody if I'm not doing something. So what happened was this. Go back to my piece. When I retired, I said, "Genug damit," which means enough of that junk. And I wasn't doing any more art because I had art up to here. So I had to do things like this. I did this maybe a few weeks after we moved. I walked down the trail. I painted this. This is all I was going to do. I was going to frame it. I did this because I had to show something for 10 or whatever. So I was going to do this and leave it at that. And before you know it, that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. There's no validation just doing some watercolors. You know, they could get into shows, they're going to win in shows. So you got to do something a little bigger, a little grander. It's got to smell like art. damn, it's gotta smell like that. And then you start working bigger. You start, well, these are. And that was the plan. Like, I don't have to get tenure as a retiree. But somehow I'm geared that, like, is that good? Is that working? So I started doing bigger things, but I recognized I didn't want to do too many because where are they gonna go? Where's the stuff gonna go? You know, all my grandfather's stuff is in my closets, not clothes. Where's my stuff gonna go? So, you know, I love to go to the museum bar. I like to do 3, 4 paintings maximum a year. Just keep drawing figures, piling them up under the bed. But you know, I feel the world needs a lot more people who know art, but it may not need a lot more artists, but we can't help ourselves. I can't stop. You can't stop. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah, it's hard.
I really appreciate your evolution. It goes back and forth. It's almost like you reinvent yourself. And I like that. It's so cool. So thank you for showing. I had a question about the Akron art scene versus the Medina art scene. When you go to Akron, you know, I've worked in Akron for years, so in Akron, it's like the art scene is alive, vibrant, probably because of the university that's there, some of the activities going on in the community. How is Medina? Look at all these wonderful artists that are here. How's Medina come from a place that doesn't think we have one? There's people out there that doesn't think Medina is an arts community. How did we all of a sudden build an arts community that people recognize and say Medina is full of this wonderful art, like Akron's do?
Akron, you know, I'm shaking my head a little bit about that. This demographic is the same demographic that I'm in Akron, but that's not the arts. The pulse of Akron, where the Knight Foundation money goes, is to younger people, people who are continuing what they call the conversation of the times. I'm not part of that conversation. And I can't be. And so, in effect, there's a lot of art happening in Akron. I think it's particularly tough for older people to tap into it because they're encouraging younger people, people who felt they're disenfranchised, people who have not been represented in our community, to now do art. Here's an example. An Akron Society of Artists is moving out of the Summit Art Space because we can't afford the thing. We don't want to keep paying $1,800 a month out of some revenue, I should say, interest earning accounts that were accrued over the years by sponsoring national shows. So we're whittling that away, and we maybe have 4 or 5 years left. We know Akron Society of Artists because there's no money left. So we're moving out, relocating in Akron, much smaller profile, where we'll meet like this. Maybe we'll have figure drawing, but have worked that out. But we're leaving because we don't have the money. Okay. And our demographic is like this, really, just, you know, with the face masks off, it could be colors, you know. Now, at the same time, a brand new group was founded last year. I think it's the Black Artists League in Akron. Never existed before. They applied for and got a $125,000 grant for a couple of shows, mainly for their existence, that supercharge their existence. Yeah, there's a lot going in Akron, but I think what happens is there's the art scene, and then there's a scene that's very similar to this. This is like the Hudson Society of Artists. This is like the Akron Society of Artists. This is like Cuyahoga Valley Art Center. It's a lot of older people with occasional younger person, but this other art being done, the type of art that appeared in on the pages of the Devil Strip when it existed. Now, I don't know who those people are. They don't know who I am. They're out there making art then. So I think there's so many different groups, and there's a lot of art happening here because I think a lot of people come here, they aspire to live here, and they've got a long history, you know, they maybe taught art, or they want to take up art, or a combination of both. So, but the art scene is different, and what we have, our struggles might be similar to yours. You might even be more active than, say, Akron Society of Artists. I talked to the president of Rubber City Artists, the same thing. Rubber City Artists was founded as an antidote to the stuffiness of the Akron Society of Artists, only to age along, to have the same problems that we have. You know, there was somebody wrote, actually the director of that art school that my grandfather taught in, he wrote that every generation of artists is like a wave, and you come out really powerful, and you wash up on the beach, and then you look back, and there's another wave, and it obliterates what you were. You know, and I'm not saying we're getting obliterated, don't misread this, but I'm saying there's other waves, and in Akron, the art scene is right now being pushed by waves in which I don't find myself. You know?
So maybe that is our niche.
I think so. It's a niche. I talked to Danielle of the CBAC when she was new director. And it's me to talk about, well, what are you going to do? Cuyahoga Valley Arts Center, how are you going to make it grow? How are you going to sustain it? And she said to me, she said, retirees, what the power of this thing with retirees? People retiring in droves. I said, well, that doesn't really seem like you got your finger on a pulse, but man, she was right. She was right on target with that. It's kind of like people are retiring, and it's interesting. I retired. I know people retired. Still know some people were teaching. And the artists who taught art retired and they make art. Now, the architects who retire, you know what they do? They go make art. There's dream of making art. Everybody did anything creative retires, want to be an artist. You know, so it's funny. It's like the retiree group is an expanding group of artists. Now, are you going to capture the notion of branding agencies? Not so much. But you're going to be active. You're going to find other people, and you're going to listen to people like me. Anything else? Any other questions?
Did you teach at Miami University? Did you say that earlier?
Yeah.
Which years were you there?
Okay. 81 to 86.
Oh, I missed you.
Okay.
57.
I missed you.
Yeah, 57, 72.
What? Yeah, they're a little late now, but sure.
How can you move the flower?
You know, if you don't mind, I could send her.
Okay, yeah, she has.
I'll send
She
you
has.
the whole image.
You have
My
my
email? Well, I get it.
I got it.
I'll get it. I know where to find you.
Okay, well, thank you. That's,
So where are you storing all this art that you?
Under your bed, right?
oh, it's in the basement, in the closets, under the
Doesn't it
bed.
bother you? You seem
Yeah.
like it would bother.
You're right.
You could share it. You could share it by selling a few here and there.
I could, that's dawned on me.
That's a good idea.
My grandfather's art can go into museums, but then you have to go and say, I'm going to tour Germany, I want to give it back to the places from where it came. And it's an effort thing, you know, it's
I know
weird.
you're right, because with each piece of yours or ours, a piece goes with you, goes out of you. Yeah, it's very difficult.
That's
You don't
so
want your
sad.
kids having to get rid of it when you're gone and donating it to Goodwill.
I know, that's dangerous.
That's what keeps my mind.
You're right, my kids could do that.
Putting it, I've seen art on curbs before. I drove by a house once and there was all this art somebody put on the curb. So I thought, okay.
Okay. On that positive-
Always training or some of those, or maybe.
Well, you don't want me to be too shy.
I'm always entertained, and boy, you know, it just is there. By the way, before we forget, Colin Wilson back there, isn't that? And she's gonna be our speaker in May. She does some pretty darn wonderful work. So make sure you're back here in May to see her.
She might not want to come back.
Yeah, Art, I don't know if you mentioned this, but Art is, this piece is in a show at St. Paul's through May 13th, and also in that show,
I think you have a few.
I have pieces, but Judy Geiser, who is one of our speakers, Carrie Lewis, who did our critique in December, Dan Lindner, who is our October speaker, Bill Pack, the workshop for us last year, John Smolko, and I think Larry Walker was here a few years ago. So there's a lot of people you know in the show. So don't know,
It's a good show.
it's a great show. Beautiful space, beautiful place to have a show. Thank you.
Just a reminder, in March, we do not have a general meeting, okay? Because of our scholarship program and awards. So we will,
Don't
our
normally
next
sit that
general
long, but
meeting
let's-
will be April, okay?
Right.